Hello, welcome to the Towson University Journal of International Affairs Roundtable Series. And our topic of this roundtable is the Strongman's Pact, a renegade Turkey, in which we will be looking at different facets of Turkish foreign policy. To guide us through our understanding of this topic, we have Everett Shurtleff, who will present on Russia-Turkey relations, Hannah Warner, who will talk about Erdogan's response to the coup, the most recent one, and Dwight Mivett, who will talk about EU-Turkish relations. So they'll each speak in turn about their topic, then we'll have a short conversation amongst everyone. And without further ado, I bring you Everett.
Thank you, Dr. McCartney. Hi, my name is Everett Shurtleff. For the last few months, I've been researching recent developments to Russia-Turkey relations and how these developments may precipitate the formation of an Eastern bloc comprising states that have grown increasingly dissatisfied with the West. So historically, relations between Russia and Turkey have not been particularly warm. For nearly 4 centuries, relations between the Ottoman Empire and the Russian Empire were fraught with conflicts. And just to give an illustrative example, the Ottoman-Russian Wars were a series of 12 separate, large-scale, long-term conflicts, the first of which began in 1568, the last of which ended in 1918. And when Turkey joined NATO in the 1950s, its opposition to Russia was cemented. And as a result, Turkey and Russia found themselves against each other during the Cold War and also the Korean War. However, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, trade between the two countries exploded. And consequently, this icy relationship has been thawed, and much of this can be attributed to the strongman brotherhood of President Erdogan and President Putin, which has acted as a veritable blowtorch to, again, these icy relations. And the most notable areas of this cooperation are defense, trade, and energy. Russia recently supplied Turkey with the S-400 missile defense system, which has been called the best air defense system that's currently available. Trade barriers between the two countries have been lifted, and exports and imports between the two nations has increased considerably as well. Russia has also shouldered the cost of Turkey's first ever nuclear power plant, and Turkey has opened its borders and approved the construction of pipelines through which Russian gas will be able to flow. The latter of these is notable because it provides Russia an alternative for their natural gas, much of which goes to Europe. Previously, this gas was, Russia was dependent on Ukraine to transport this gas and act as a go-between between Russia and the rest of Europe. So in recent years, Ukraine has grown increasingly warm to the West, and this has undoubtedly been a cause of concern for President Putin. So by passing through Turkey, not only is, not only is Russia no longer dependent on an increasingly Western aligned state like Ukraine, this gas can reach many new markets, and the two like-minded leaders rather can now control 40% of Europe's natural gas imports. But this recent cooperation has not gone unnoticed, and it hasn't gone unsanctioned. In response to Turkey's acquisition of the S-400 missile defense system, the U.S. has blocked Turkey as an export destination for military technology. Recently, and I think it was 2018 or 2019, Turkey placed an order for 120 American-made F-35 fighter jets. However, again, due to the acquisition of the S-400 missile defense system, this order was canceled, and the training of Turkish fighter pilots on American bases was subsequently halted as well. And these signals have really done little to deviate Turkey from its current path. The Turkish defense minister publicly rebuked the efforts made by the U.S. in response to the S-400 missile defense system, and President Erdogan's stated desire to overhaul Turkey's economy, military, and defense sector can only be tempered for so long. And as President Putin and President Erdogan continue to align the interests of their respective nations, the possible consequences they can't be ignored. Downplaying the possibility of an Eastern bloc is ill-advised. If it becomes clear that capitulation to Western demands is not necessary to secure a state's national interest, leaders of states that have been similarly deprived by the West may follow suit with Turkey. And when these leaders share similarly authoritarian attitudes, an alliance with President Erdogan and President Putin seems much more likely. The strength of this hypothetical allowance doesn't come from their power as individual standalone states, but rather the power they have as a collective group. The European Union has brought European countries to the forefront of global policy, but their hardline stance against Turkey may have pushed a formidable adversary past the brink of no return.
Wow, thank you for that optimistic summary, Everett. for more sunshine and roses. Hannah will now talk to us about Erdogan's response to a coup. Hannah?
Thank you, Dr. McCartney. Hello, my name is Hannah Warner, and I'll be talking about Erdogan's post-coup attempt response and the shift away from the Western ideology. I'll be discussing the most recent coup attempt of 2016 and the channel it has created for President Recep Tayyip Erdogan to assert his own personal authoritarian agenda, pushing Turkey ideologically further from Europe towards Eastern countries like Russia. On July 15, 2016, the Turkish armed forces launched an attack on the Turkish presidential administration from an air base near the capital of Ankara, marking the bloodiest coup attempt in Turkish political history. Today, President Erdogan continues to make arrests and accusations of Turkish citizens for their involvement. Civil servants, including teachers and academics, have been removed from their positions and replaced with loyalists. More than 292,000 people have been detained for over links to the attack, and over 100,000 of these suspects are still waiting in jail for a fair trial. To date, 337 suspects have been sentenced to life in prison. 291 of these life sentences are aggravated life sentences, which is the most severe punishment of the Turkish courts. The 2016 coup attempt presented an opportunity for President Erdogan to increase the power of the presidential position while simultaneously building the pre-existing anti-West sentiments among Turkish citizens. Through his implementation of a state of emergency, Erdogan has successfully transformed the constitution to benefit his presidency, eliminating checks on executive power by the legislative and judicial branches through his 2017 constitutional referendum. Without oversight, Erdogan has cracked down on dissent among the population by limiting political opposition gatherings, arresting journalists, censoring all forms of media, and persecuting minority groups. While continually committing major human rights atrocities against the Turkish population, Erdogan has retained his conservative support base through his polarizing strongman attitude and the stirring of anti-West and anti-EU sentiments. In speech, Erdogan champions democracy. However, according to his actions, he is running an authoritarian regime. Ultimately, the coup attempt has benefited the Erdogan administration by creating an avenue through which Erdogan can conduct Turkish life in a manner that strays far away from the principles of democracy. And as Turkey grows away from the Western values, they grow closer to other Eastern countries such as Russia, who support Erdogan despite his actions and are actively pursuing a partnership with Turkey.
Thank you, Hannah. We've gone from Russia to Turkey itself, and now we will look in the other direction towards the EU with Dwight's presentation.
Thank you, Dr. McCartney. So I think this is a very interesting layer to examine, just Turkish EU relations from the perspective that you can kind of look at it as a dysfunctional marriage, that couple that's married together, they talk about divorce every day, but never actually do it. So basically what's happening is that Turkey is unable to meet all the accession requirements. It's an open secret that Turkey cannot meet them, really does not want to meet them. So therefore, Turkish admittance to the EU, probably not going to happen. So this is creating a ripple effect, and it can have certain future consequences. And I think the way to look at this is to say, well, if not EU membership, what happens in place of that? So the most popular theory being kicked around, most popular idea being kicked around is that of a privileged partnership. The only real concrete step that entails so far is an upgrade to the customs union, which is good, fostering stronger economic ties, trying to get Turkey to step up its economic functioning. However, what a privileged partnership actually attempts to do is to extract EU-like concessions from Turkey without granting Turkey membership. So we can anticipate, Turkey has already indicated actually, that it will not tolerate a special membership designation. It wants EU membership, or is going to cultivate alternative alliances. So that mindset in and of itself is very interesting. In the early 2000s, a scholar turned Minister of Defense, Davutoglu, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but he made the idea of strategic depth very, very popular, which just means that Turkey wants to look at all the surrounding regions and start cultivating ties with the regions surrounding it, right? So we know Turkey has access to Europe, has access to Northern Africa, the Middle East, parts of Asia. It has very, very solid, strong geography. And with strategic depth and the idea that goes along with that, which is termed no problem with neighbors, what that means basically is that Turkey is willing and makes a value of cultivating alternative alliances. It does not want to solely rely on the West. And we can anticipate that the more tensions develop with Turkey and the EU, the more it is going to cultivate good relations with other regions. Some regions containing states that the West views as adversarial, problematic, things of that nature. So digging into it further, the two main things that cause tension between the EU and Turkey, internally is authoritarianism, absolutely unacceptable given how democratic EU is, given how liberal-minded and holding liberal values the EU is. This streak towards authoritarianism, especially under Erdogan, virtually makes it impossible without him in place, I guess, unless he suffers like head trauma and just changes personality. We can imagine that as tensions continually worsen, Turkey is going to turn more and more eastward. Another layer to this is NATO, because so many EU states are also members of NATO. And a lot of the EU's problems with Turkey stems what Turkey has done to NATO allies. Okay, so an example of this, they shot down a Greek fighter jet. Honestly, that's an act of war, if you want to be blunt about it. They refused to recognize the Republic of Cyprus. They got into a standoff with French frigates that almost went to a firefight. People on deck had to go get bulletproof vests, things like that. They bought the S-400 missile system. It's like really crazy to think about that Turkey is a NATO ally and it acts like the Eastern countries that is developing closer ties with China, Russia, Pakistan, Iran, those types of countries. More and more is turning east and is acting in a way that's very adversarial to the states that it's allied with. So naturally, Turkey being a NATO ally, pressing the issue of EU membership is kind of nonsensical between the authoritarianism and what they're doing militarily. It's just a huge contradiction. And what this is about is Turkey wanted to gain as much advantage as possible. But the EU is absolutely justified in refusing Turkey entry to the EU. So with that being said, what are some alternatives, some tangible alternatives? The Shanghai Corporation, right? The main members are China, Russia. There are some other members, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, but China and Russia are the main members of the Shanghai Corporation organization. So out loud, they declare they're going to cooperate against terrorism. They're going to cooperate economically, but all members have a track record of violating human rights, authoritarian streaks, things of that nature. So there's kind of a sense of we don't need to take this too serious because these are kind of alliances of convenience. They could crumble very easily. These states have track records of not really getting along. But the way I like to view it is kind of with a historical lens. You think about Europe right prior to the First World War. Europe was in shambles. No one got along. They were all adversarial. They were enemies. They were constantly fighting. You fast forward, not even 100 years later, and they're cooperating in one big entity, right? So who's to say that this Eastern Bloc that's developing will not be a huge threat later on? So there's a little bit of sitting on our hands here, which I think is a bit typical of Europe, to be honest. We don't have to do anything yet. It'll probably be okay. There's not a whole lot of proactive activity. Turkey has a decent military. Turkey has a lot of economic potential, and Turkey has geography that can make it a geopolitical headache in the right circumstances. So all this does go back to Turkish-EU relations. A lot of it is silly bickering, very silly bickering, but it could easily get out of control and create a very different geopolitical international relations landscape down the line.
All right, so we started optimistically, we finish optimistically, optimism all the way through. Assuming there will be no head trauma involved for Erdogan to set him straight, it looks like we have some serious things to think through. So I have a few questions, and I'll direct them to individual presenters, but I invite the others to chime in if they so choose. And I will ask the first one of Dwight. All right, now Dwight, how do the Turkish people feel about joining the EU? Erdogan is an authoritarian. He's going to do what he's going to do anyway, but would he have the Turkish people on board in his opposition to the EU, or would they rather join the EU?
So polls that I find going from 2016 to 2019, what I found for 2020 was kind of inconsistent, but there was an upward trend towards desiring EU membership, right? And I'm assuming that these polls are being conducted in a very yes/no way. The reality is a lot more complicated. So yes, they vote in favor of joining the EU, but they also poll back in 2018, actually, I think it was 45% polled stating that there was a double standard when it comes to admitting Turkey to the EU. So they do desire membership, but they think the system is a bit rigged against them. And of course, there's rhetoric within Turkey stating that the EU is playing a double game. Some member states getting easier than Turkey. Some member states don't face the same barriers to entry as Turkey. And the Turks, of course, they love Turkey. You know, whether it's Erdogan or someone else, they're going to love their country. They're going to support their country. It's not so binary as to say Turks want to enter the EU and love the EU, as much as to say that they believe that they deserve a place in the EU. But there are a lot of problems surrounding that.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add to that, Everett?
Sure, yeah, I'll jump in. And so again, I was just wanted to go off the polls that Dwight was talking about. There's a 2017 poll that was conducted by, it was Kadir Has University. 51.6% of respondents opposed accession to the EU, compared to only 48.4% of those respondents in support. And, you know, in addition to the 20-year stint that Turkey has spent in the EU waiting room, when it came to Turkey's accession into the EU applied a novel concept called absorption capacity, which, even if all of the meta conditions for accession were met by Turkey, the EU could still summarily deny Turkey's entry if the EU judged that it wasn't ready to take in a new member. So again, the length of time that Turkey has been almost in a purgatory with the EU, the finish line has been moved after the race has already begun, and that's not eliciting too many feelings of gratitude from Turkish citizens.
Yeah.
Hannah?
Sorry. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that the anti-West sentiments that have been stirring among the Turkish population have altered the opinions of the people in wanting to join the EU. I mean, and Erdogan constantly he seems to want to be a part of the EU while also taking shots at European leaders and damaging relations. I mean, in 2017, he suggested German Chancellor Angela Merkel exhibited Nazism for saying that Turkey's EU accession bid could be reconsidered in light of the deteriorating human rights situation. I mean, statements like these unite the domestic constituencies with deeply anti-Western views. And I think that many Turks think that Europe doesn't want them to be a part of the EU. In a survey I looked at by the CAP, done in Turkey in 2018, with face-to-face interviews with almost 3,000 Turkish citizens, just 20% of the people thought the European government wanted Turkey in the European Union. So I think that the people of Turkey are feeling really unwanted by the European Union. And even though it's attractive because they'd like to travel, work, and study there, relations and the relationship there is really, really damaged.
Okay, so all three of you shed light on how the Turkish people feel, and bear in mind, of course, that in all countries is going to be a diversity of opinions about anything, and often opposition. But I'm especially interested in knowing how the Turkish people feel about Erdogan, who seems to have support despite being an authoritarian leader and the human rights violator. And of course, that means that it's not going to be all the Turkish people, but he certainly has some support. And Everett, would you like to shed some light on how it is that he has managed to keep what support he has?
Sure. Much of that continued support, even as Turkey, the recent actions of President Erdogan continue to make international headlines is because at its core, Turkey is a rather conservative country. Society is still governed by archaic gender roles, ones which expect or rather demand children and marriage from women and income from the men. Women are severely underrepresented in parliament and the workforce, and the ruling party of Turkey, the AKP, once considered cutting domestic violence protections in order to deter women from seeking divorce. So progressive attitudes face an uphill battle in Turkey. Their ideas are denied by the ruling parties and are often met with guffaws by much of society. And so President Erdogan's repeated commitment to a non-secular Turkey has garnered him widespread support, even in the face of all of these atrocities that he's committed. So looking at it from I guess, that standpoint, when it's their guy, as in President Erdogan, suppressing the freedoms of people with whom they disagree, it's easier for the conservative portion of the population to turn a blind eye to all of the things happening within their borders. And his, again, like Hannah mentioned during her presentation, his strongman leadership style is not entirely unpopular. Those aforementioned gender roles come into play here as well. Men are expected to be resolute, decisive, and unwaveringly supportive of Turkey. And through populism, propaganda, and a carefully crafted international image in international politics, President Erdogan has idealized himself to his supporters. So again, even in the face of coups, even in the extension of a state of emergency for more than 2 years, the suppression of social freedoms, he's able, I guess, to get away with it, if because I can't think of any better words to describe that.
I think that was really well put. I think that that conservative attitude in Turkey, Erdogan's very smart, even though he seems a bit reckless in some of his decision making and the things he does, but he's very smart and he knows the people, and he knows that those that support him will support him unconditionally, and those that don't will stay quiet, because with the 2016 coup attempt and the mass arrests he's carried out to root out supporters, not just of those who he thought supported Gulen, who he believes is behind the coup, but just in general in opposition to the AKP party. He really has put a fear in those people, that they know that if they don't have voice to speak up, they'll be censored if they speak up. And if they do speak up, they're probably going to be arrested or they're going to be punished. And so he has solidified his support with his base, but at the same time, he has caused silence among those that don't support him through his actions. And it's really helped to maintain this image of him as still a widely supported and loved leader.
And to I guess, give a little bit of context and scale to the suppressions and crackdown of Erdogan in the post-coup Turkey, I think it was over 100,000 teachers, prosecutors, judges, academics, professors were all dismissed from their jobs. And in order to protect their jobs, there is this almost expected silence. You're not allowed to dissent for fear of losing your job, for fear of losing your livelihood, or, as Hannah mentioned earlier, going to jail on trumped up charges.
All right, so the happy train rolls on. I'd like to direct the next question to Hannah. And everyone else could feel free to jump in as well after Hannah says her piece. Do you think, Hannah, that Europe is underestimating the long-term significance of Turkey leaning towards the east, i.e. Russia and the authoritarian bloc that Dwight described?
Yeah, I definitely think they are underestimating the significance and what could happen if Turkey leans toward the east. But I think more than anything, they're underestimating and failing to address the shift in the Turkish public opinion and attitudes. I think that because the Turkish people are feeling unwanted, if Europe fails to recognize those needs and build a relationship with Turkey, Turkey will take their allegiance elsewhere. And I think that the EU still thinks that Turkey wants and needs them more than they need Turkey, but in reality, Europe needs to realize the significance of Turkey to Russia and men relations before the damage is done. I think that the pandemic has brought some time and a shift in focus, but it's something to consider as we're emerging out of this. Turkish respondents in the poll I mentioned earlier actually 50% supported building ties with Russia, and only 40% were against not doing so, which was very surprising considering the history of conflict between Russia and Turkey. But the Turkish public shows little trust for Russia, but it's growing with their relationship growing, and the United States also, but the mistrust is especially strong towards the US. So I think that if the EU and the US fail to invest in their relationship with Turkey and Russia, and Russia continues to proactively seek Turkish alliance, Turkish public opinion will continue to shift away from the West and will ultimately cause this bloc to form. And I think that the biggest thing is that we don't really know what this bloc could bring. It just would bring uncertainty to the world. And so if Turkey joins the EU can have some sort of control over them. Obviously, they need to have Turkey conform at least somewhat to their rules prior to that. But without influence over Turkey, Turkey will be influenced by someone else, and that will cause a lot of uncertainty in international affairs.
I just want to add on to that a bit. Turkey does have desire to be something of a regional hegemon. So it doesn't view itself as latching on to alternative powers as like a sidekick. It believes that because its geography is so smack in the middle, that it could play big brother to surrounding regions. So there could be some view in Europe that Turkey has this haughty attitude, the same as Russia, the same as China. All these states have contentious relationships, contentious histories. If they do, try to foster ties with each other, it's going to be short-lived, or it's going to be very difficult to fully establish. My counter to that is we can remember a time where Britain and France were bitter enemies for a very, very long period. Russia and Britain, Russia and France, a lot of European powers, some that no longer even exist, they've had contentious relationships and very, very bad blood in history. So the idea that we can sit on our hands because of current relations doesn't take into account the fact that anything could happen in politics. I think the other aspect here is economic development and economic integration. The EU is very big on believing that if you develop, the capitalist market, although we view it kind of socialistic, if you develop your markets and integrate with each other, that's the only way towards economic strength. Who can imagine China, Russia, India, Pakistan, Turkey, these countries cooperate the way that the EU does? That's somewhat difficult to imagine until you consider that China is about to become the largest economy in the world. Russia is making some aggressive moves in the Arctic. India is something of a dark horse. There's a lot of potential there as well. So this Eastern Bloc that's forming, maybe it looks flimsy, but there's so much potential that if the perfect storm develops, you could have something very serious. The West hasn't been on top of the world forever. There's been Eastern states that were pretty much virtual hegemons in the past. There have been Eastern alliances that were very, very, very strong to defeat and shake up. So we don't know what's really developing. And I think Europe's reluctance to form a tangible strategy beyond, privileged partnership, let's shame these states in the media, that's not going to have a whole lot of longevity.
Okay. The China's Belt Road Initiative, and I would encourage everyone to watch another roundtable that on Chinese foreign economic policy speaks to what you all have been saying. I feel like my final question for you all is almost superfluous, since you all have been speaking to this question, but I'll ask it anyway. And if you want to say a little bit more than what you've said, please do. And this question is, what do you think will be the consequences if this shift that you're all describing, that you perceive in Turkey's stance away from Europe and the West and towards what you're calling the East, the authoritarian, the non-West, say outlast Erdogan, even if he gets knocked in the head, and becomes a permanent realignment And we have a new kind of Eastern Bloc, like the Belt Road Initiative connects with Turkey, and then they're in. And do you think it's possible? So I'll add that dimension, or likely, or whatever. And what do you think it would mean for the West in particular if Turkey were to make this shift?
I think for the West in particular, it would, as Hannah said earlier, would generate an atmosphere of uncertainty, of restiveness and unease. And again, we've all been, sunshine and lilacs and things like that. So I don't want to be too optimistic here. I don't think global thermonuclear war is going to be a super imminent threat. I don't think it's anything we're going to have to worry about. But with the formation of an Eastern Bloc, with that kind of consolidation of power between two states that are incredibly powerful by themselves, political intentions, they're going to be muddied. Military capabilities of both states are going to be increased, and economic dependencies on the West are no longer deterrents to either state's complete withdrawal. And, almost instinctually, the existing global order, that being the West, the United States, the European Union, they're going to be wary of that which they can't control. So when neither the application nor the threat of sanctions has an effect on directing the actions of Turkey, as Dwight said, we're left sitting on our hands, holding our breaths, and just waiting to see what happens. And do I think it's likely to happen? Again, the formation of this bloc, I believe, is kind of dependent on the attitudes of both leaders. So if, something personal happens between them and this relationship is scrapped forever, I think we can safely say that the chances of anything happening they're dead in the water too. But, because their common ground is the degradation of Western influence, I see them getting past any kind of bitter rivalries and things like that.
To get a bit philosophical, reminds me of Francis Fukuyama, his The End of History and the Last Man, his idea that the final form of government is liberal democracy. Let's say this Eastern Bloc fully develops, and you have adversarial states like China, Russia, Turkey, and all these states being the face of the globe. We can see like either a throwback to previous forms of governance that the West doesn't like, or who's to say that a new form of government doesn't arrive. But what this represents is that we cannot take for granted that democracy will always win. Or we cannot take for granted the fact, we cannot believe that democracy is the current default, because it isn't. There has to be, in my opinion, some dose of realism to say that if a state or a bloc acquires enough power, they can impose their viewpoint, their philosophies, their type of governance onto the rest of the world, or pressure the rest of the world with that, kind of like how the West does with democracy. There are states that don't want to be democratic, and we pressure them in certain ways. We can see a reversal occur, and we can see a globe that looks very different and potentially not so democratic, not so liberal, not so integrated, not so globalist. For good or bad, I think would be for the worse. But it represents an alternative. I think is the most profound thing about it.
Dwight, Hannah, would you like to add to what Everett and Dwight said?
Yeah, I think that Dwight is correct when he says that, the alternative is a possibility. And if that alternative gains as much power and as much representation in the world as democracy has currently, that there could really be a battle between the two different ideologies, which will just complicate things more for the West. And I think that this bloc would bring a lot of uncertainty, and that's something that in the interest of the West should want to prevent in order to keep international affairs consistent and their lives simpler. But without a change in relations with Turkey, with both the EU and just the West in general, it's looking like Turkey is consistently shifting away and more towards this authoritarian attitude. And the attitudes of the West in both the media and just in leadership relations is something that is going to need to be more positive if Turkey is going to keep pursuing being a part of the EU and the West, and hopefully shifting back more towards a democratic system.
Oh, okay. Well, this is the challenge of foreign policy. We are at clearly a delicate moment, right? In Turkish history and regional history, and to some degree, world history with these forces. And so it's going to take some statesmanship for things to turn out the way we want, but never underestimate contingency. Things happen. I mean, living through COVID, who could have seen COVID coming and all the effects? So hopefully when those contingencies happen, as they always do, that they nudge things in a direction that we find favorable and don't lead us into a difficult situation. But I'd like to thank all three of the speakers, Dwight, Everett, and Hannah, for helping us to think through this very delicate and potentially dangerous situation in world politics.